Ooh. Wow, this is a funny chair.
Right.
Indigenous knowledge.
Right.
There are the tribes, the natives in Latin America. Some of them are still keeping their cultures, like the Kogis, for example.
Right.
I don't know if you have heard of them. So, what do you think about their spirituality? There is a truth to the notion that everything is living, that stones, trees are living, and nature is to communicate with spiritually. What do you think about that?
I've always had certain fairly deep questions about tribal spirituality. Just in terms of its chronological age, it really was, the tribal mentality did occur in, well, there were hundreds of tribes in America, and they were all spent most of their time fighting with each other. And the religion usually demonstrated to me a mentality of about that age. Although the mystical traditions the world over generally agree with each other, I found very few tribal spiritualities that actually fit the overall mystical paradigm. And they just always sort of seem to come up short. And then, of course, there were exceptions, and you would occasionally find a very wise tribal senior chieftain or whoever. And I was always glad to find that because it just sort of increased my belief in the unity of the mystical traditions around the world. But it wasn't that often. And mostly what I saw when I saw tribes were, Cheyenne attacking Comanche, Comanche attacking on and on and on. It didn't surprise me, but it sort of disappointed me.
But there are tribes, though, who don't attack anyone. Like probably they are on the magenta level, the stage 2 level tribes,
Right.
Hunter-gatherers,
Right.
living in small village in the forest. They don't have arms, they don't attack anyone, they don't want territory. And maybe the stage 3 red tribes are the ones who attack and want.
Well, yeah, I'm
that?
sure that's probably right. Very few of them had really well-developed mystical insights. And what slightly bothered me was the number of people. Almost every American thinks that the tribes were super mystical, super spiritual, super religious. Why? Well, apparently because they worship the earth. And so they were ecological saints. And I would go, okay, that's not right.
You don't believe they were ecological saints or they were close to nature in a mystical way?
See, that's another thing. You can be ecological for many reasons other than you feel one with the earth. Some tribes, and I'm not trying to badmouth tribes in doing this, and they'll think that things that are alive and that move, like animals, or some of them will extend it to trees, they're alive. And then they'll say stones are alive because stones are part of the forest. To say that certain tribes didn't measure up to a really full-blown mystical awareness is not to say anything bad about the tribes. They got us to where we are. So they're very important in terms of evolutionary development.
When you say mystical awakening or mystical heights, basically you are talking about the causal level, causal and non-dual level,
Yes.
where we distinguish the real self, the awakened self, and the small self. And yes, the tribe don't talk about that. The indigenous people, they don't have that. They are more, to me, like masters of the psychic field, psychic, subtle field, like spirit beings, energies, feeling the soul of nature, something like that, spiritual intuition.
When you say psychic, soul energy, which for me is the beginning of third tier.
Yeah, exactly.
At least some Indian tribes, because they felt that the forest and animals in it were alive, they extended aliveness to everything they saw. But that it was part of the whole thing, and the whole thing had a psychic energy. Now, I don't know how many tribes had that, but I do know a few tribes that felt that way. And so, to me, that all becomes part of the tribal understanding of mystical awareness. And I'm sure some of them felt the way you described, and there was a psychic field, and it did go all the way down, and included rocks inherently, I'm sure.
I think it's important for us, for the integral theory, to understand more or dig more into those indigenous people, those tribes who are still alive, still preserve their culture, not impacted by us, not interpreted by the white people. Let them tell their own spirituality.
Sure.
And see how we can expand, because we are so good in your integral theory, understanding Eastern philosophy, Buddhism, yoga, etc. I'm not sure we are as good understanding the indigenous, simply because we don't really meet them.
Right.
When you talk about the tribes that you mentioned here in North America, Cheyenne, Cherokee, etc., we didn't meet them. We can't ask them. We don't see them. We cannot communicate with them.
Right.
You cannot go and find an uncontacted tribe in the United States and spend 2 weeks with them.
Right.
Right? But we might be able to do that in South America and see how is their spirituality.
Well, I think that's very important. I already have this general understanding that what, let's say, an early infant goes through would be similar to what early tribes would go through. And early infants are one with everything. They don't distinguish themselves from a tree. They can't distinguish, they can't differentiate the brain or the mind from that which is seen. So seer and seen are undifferentiated. And so anything the infant looks at in the first months of life, it'll think it's one with. Mm-hmm. And that's not because it's really in a mystical state with that thing. It's in a pre-differentiated state. Mm-hmm. And so far, that turns out to be a fairly inviolable law for infants. And then starting around 6 months, it'll start to differentiate the signifier from the referent. And then they can have an actual, real cosmic consciousness starting towards the end of the first year and the beginning of the second year. Mm-hmm. And my sense is that a fair number of tribes were still in that infantile, non-differentiated state. Mm-hmm. I don't know that that's true, but I have read certain, there were a fair number of scouts and military men and people that did get to know several of the Indians fairly well, and they did see them. I have read accounts that some of them wrote about their understanding of the mm-hmm. Indians' relationship to mm-hmm. their environment. Mm-hmm.
this is the four quadrants,
Yeah.
and in it, the stages, right? The stages.
Right.
And here is the external world,
Right.
like a tree, a stone, a person, an animal, and here is the subjective experience.
Right.
So basically you say that in the early stages of evolution, atoms, molecules, prokaryotes, etc., they already have subjective experience.
That's right.
So I'm wondering that how do you imagine an atom having a subjective experience? How do you imagine an amoeba having a subjective experience?
Well, a robot wouldn't as a robot.
Okay.
But its parts would. Because they would be holons. And the way that I give an atom subjectivity is largely through the so-called panpsychic philosophers of the West, of which by far I think the greatest was Alfred North Whitehead. And I never liked the word panpsychic because I thought psyche was a little bit too much to think an atom had a psyche. It's too big to get into an atom to begin with. But Whitehead handled that by, he said, all holons have prehension, which just means feeling, and that's what an atom and a quark has. They all have prehension.
What would be prehension more precisely? What is prehension?
It's just feeling.
Feeling.
A very primitive feeling. And I can see an atom feeling, I mean, because it bumps into things and reacts to them. It'll move away when it bumps into them. So, and I accepted Whitehead's analysis of prehension, and I believe pretty much everything he said about it. And so that's why I write prehension as the first subjectivity in the upper left quadrant. It's prehension to image, the symbol, the concept, to rule, and so on. And prehension gets more and more complex as it evolves and goes up the spectrum. And I do believe that some tribal people understood that in the Whiteheadian sense. And as for like their ecological knowledge, I'm sure that's very true, because they were in touch with like forests and animals and plants and that kind of stuff, and they were the same size as them, and they interacted with them, and they lived on them, and they knew them really well. And so I believe all of that, but I am wary of some tribes extending that consciousness to things like stones or rocks or mountains, because I just don't think that works. Although mountains do have holons that they're made of, certain dirt and rocks and so on. And those holons all have prehension.
And also, indigenous people also say, but not just indigenous, us as well, say that there are power places, that there are energetic places, highlighted places, sacred places,
Right.
that it might be not just heap of mountain and dirt,
Right.
but at some places there is something that people feel,
Right.
that there's an extra power.
And I believe
energy.
that.
I believe it too.
Yeah.
So, and what do you think that would be then? That extra power, energy?
Well, that comes from their sensitivity to the surrounding meso range of forests and animals and plants and so on. And I think that sensitivity makes them sensitive to these actual outbreaks of subtle energy around the world. And they can actually feel it and spot it and know it. So that makes perfect sense to me.
I'm studying now the Kogi natives
Right.
in Colombia. I let you know if I know more,
Right.
because I think we can do a service to integral theory,
Right.
to your theory, by understanding better the indigenous native wisdom,
Sure.
seeing whether it's all true or is partially
Right.
like childhood magical thinking,
Right.
or partially psychic and subtle knowledge. That's my sense, that it's a lot of the upper stages as well. Probably not everyone, but
Yeah.
the more spiritually sensitive ones.
What I also look for in terms of tribal awareness, when do we start seeing true lineages of real satori-like experiences? Like Zen Buddhists have been very careful to trace their own lineage from Gautama Buddha out through the 6 Zen patriarchs and then over to Japan and their patriarchs. And all of those are passing on their awakened awareness to their successor. And then he passes it on. And in the best studied version of that, we have the 6 Zen patriarchs in China, and then they jump from China over to Japan, and those are tracked very well also. And the 6 Zen patriarchs, we know exactly who their successors were, and they would always give a particular book to their successor because they felt it was a book that best understood their satori experience. And for the first 5 of them, the book they all gave to their successors was the Lankavatara Sutra. And when I first ran into Zen, I read D.T. Suzuki. He was just a writer on Zen Buddhism. He wrote something like 20 books, and it was all dealing with koans and mu and sound of one hand clapping and all of that kind of stuff. But I was so impressed by the fact that the Lankavatara Sutra was the one that all the first Zen masters handed down, that when I had my spontaneous mystical experience at age 14 and I wanted another one, I realized it was a spiritual experience. I immediately started looking at all of the mystical traditions around the world. And that's when I discovered that they all essentially said the same thing, although they're mythic versions, which came from when they were 5 years old. They all disagreed with each other. And that really showed me, okay, those are really fucked up. The mystical, they're all agreed, so they've got to be dealing with the truth. And when I wrote to Zen masters in America, and this was in the 60s, which was called the psychedelic era because that's when LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, they were all discovered in the late 60s. I started writing the Zen masters, of which there were a lot because they were all flooding to America because all the Zen students were coming from America and they were looking for Zen masters. I would write a letter and the letters all had the same form. The first 6 to 8 pages of the letter would explain my understanding of the Lankavatara Sutra.
Wow.
Because I figured if anything will impress them, that will impress them. And so I sat down and I finally found a really good Zen master who agreed to give me a koan by mail, and he did. And it took me 2 years to pass it, and I wrote him my response, and he cleared me. He said, yeah, that's right. So I'm looking for how many original tribes turned into a lineage of Zen masters, because we know the Zen masters got mystical truly. So if the Native American tribes were also dipping into that area, would start to see a lineage of Zen masters or the equivalent of mystical understanders in the tribes. And that I would never really find.
I see.
I don't know if you're finding it in Kogi or not, but let me know if you do.
I'll let you know. The Kogi is very deep. It's when I first meet them, I need to put aside my Western assumptions.
Right.
And I need to spend several weeks retreat with them. And they offer retreats, but not in a personal way.
Right.
Like they invite me to spend time with them, with their families, in their meditations.
Right.
So I need to do that to have the first person experience to understand it better.
Right.
I let you know. But that's my sense that we need to look in the Latin American native population, because there are still indigenous, like the Kogis, who keep their original culture. Part of them already are affected by modernism, but parts still preserve. And I think we need to save them from us.
We also have to save them from our white man's reading immensely spiritual and mystical things into tribes just because they're tribes.
Right. I call it postmodern colonization.
Right.
We need to save them from that too, not just from orange colonization and blue religion.
What do you think about Aztecs and Mayans?
They were wild.
Yeah.
They were aggressive. So what you were talking about, they killing people, sacrificing. But actually, I was talking with a Quechua guy, and he told me a deeper reading even of that what is the most sacred thing to you? Your own daughter, your own children. So actually offering that, because these were offering that is the deepest letting go, the deepest sacrifice. I'm not saying I would do that or would let anyone do that.
Right.
But that deeps actually a deeper understanding, a deeper cut why the Aztecs and Mayans were and others too were sacrificing people, their children, because with that was the biggest honor. So if the priest approached you and said you should sacrifice your daughter for the family, that was the deepest honor, that I am able to do the deepest sacrifice to the spirit world, basically.
Well,
and if you think that might be a deeper sense of love, for us very distorted and pervert, but for them in the ages of offerings to the spirit world.
Well, there's also a mystical school that maintains that the greatest sacrifice you can do is of your family, because you have overcome those attachments. You're no longer identified with them. So you could, of course, it's not a big deal to kill your daughter. It's the first choice to prove that you're enlightened. I have tried an enormous number of brain application, energy, electricity, various frequencies, and so on. I've tried, at least 50 of them.
I saw you, though, in one video, you stop your brainwaves. It's called Ken Wilber Stops the Brainwave. It's impressive.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, what did you do and what did you experience there?
Right. I was putting together a mind machine, right? Is that the one you're talking about? Yeah.
Well, it's got like lights going down. And
On YouTube, yeah.
You're sitting on your bed, I think.
Right. And what it showed was theta or delta, theta, beta, and alpha waves. And what I noticed is that delta waves, which are present with witnessing or deep sleep or deep formless sleep, the delta waves were always maximum. And they stayed that way through the whole filming cycle. And that was sort of interesting to me. It was a bit of news. So, okay, I'm always witnessing. And of course, I knew that because I was. But apparently, this was demonstrating it. And then when I sort of did the mantra meditation that came with the company that produced the mirror mind machine, I produced exactly the pattern that they suggested, which was an increase, a decrease in alpha, an increase in beta, a decrease in theta, and a slight increase in delta.
That was suggested?
Yeah. And that's what showed up when I started doing their mantra. And I thought that was interesting. So I thought, well, okay, apparently this machine knows what it's doing.
And do you remember what did you experience internally?
A whole body bliss.
Oh, okay.
Which they also claimed. But that's what I actually felt. It was just sort of a whole blissful relaxation of my entire body.
And were you aware of your surroundings, or you were totally focused inside?
Yeah.
You were aware of your surroundings?
Yeah. And I thought that was weird. Because supposedly I was in a formless state. But I had experienced full delta, and I was still aware of what was going on. And I subsequently learned that there are actually delta states where you can see objects. And that was apparently a type that I had worked myself into.
And did you experience, or did you study the stages of jhanas and vipassana?
Yeah.
Yeah? And do you think you experienced or you worked through jhanas, first jhana, second jhana, or any of that? Or wasn't that your path that much?
I didn't.
Oh, okay.
I didn't try.